menu.
Dante, you want to kick it off, and then Matthias, any of you, and then hand over to me, and then I hand over. Or how should we? Should I just start?
Yeah, we can just start right away. Maybe welcoming.
Yeah. Let's do so. Yeah.
So hello everyone from Brussels to this webinar that is co-hosted by Ecker Ecker and EUCOPE. So today we'll be looking into some recent changes in the German system, and I know this has garnered a lot of interest from all of you. We have a high number of registrations to this webinar, so very much looking forward to this. I should note that there is a chat function and there's also a Q&A function. So if you have any questions, please do post them in the chat, and then we will bring those to the attention of our great speakers today. You can also use the Q&A function as well if you would like. With that, that's all from us, and I hand it over to Alexander and Thomas.
Yes, a warm welcome also from my end. It's really a pleasure to, in a minute, to introduce the two speakers from Ecker and Ecker. And also it's a pleasure to do this webinar on Germany together with Ecker and Ecker, who approached us on these important developments in Germany and suggested that we would make a webinar about this. And this is what we're doing here. It's great to have a lot of people attending here. And yeah, there are many changes in the German pricing and reimbursement landscape, and I think the high attendance is also due to the fact that Germany is a first launch country in Europe, not just for orphan drugs, but I would say for any medicine. Germany is quite relevant as well in the context of international reference pricing, and hence we thought we put some focus and attention on this country in Germany. There are a couple of things which we will walk you through in this webinar. We would also want to encourage you to ask questions also by raising hands potentially at any time, so we have an interactive opportunity for a good discussion. You can also post your questions in the chat, and there are some developments which we will go through. There is the decrease of the 50 million threshold for orphan drugs to submit a full dossier nowadays from 30 million onwards GKV sales. There's already a decision out from GBA which products have been concerned by this. This came out early February, so I think there are 7 or 8 products which have already exceeded the 30 million threshold retroactively. So we're going to talk about this a little bit. We will also speak a little bit about the so-called guardrails. In Germany, we say Leitplanken. I don't want to walk you through the whole agenda here. I leave it rather to the colleagues from Ecker and Ecker to do so. Certainly, we want to touch on this GKV Finanzstabilisierungsgesetz, which introduces also those new guardrails, which actually cap the negotiations for both sides of the table, the payers and also the company, when you don't have a considerable or significant additional benefit. We will discuss whether that applies to orphans as well, because technically speaking, there is no comparator if you're under the 30 million. But first and foremost, what we call the earthquake is a big word, but it's certainly a very, very big decision with a very big footprint in Germany. This new case law from the highest social court. We don't want to be boring you with too many legal aspects here, but it's certainly a very important decision, which in a nutshell is saying that if you have a solitary status in your medicine, then the court, and this is the highest court in Germany in the social setting, has ruled in late February that then there should be no AMNOG procedure. So in that sense, I think we're not using the earthquake word too much, but for the German pricing and reimbursement landscape, it's certainly an extremely relevant decision, which might be corrected by the legislator. Anyway, these are my 2 minutes, I think, in the beginning. I will come in anytime with maybe a question or a perspective here, and this is how we wanted to keep that, to make sure that it's interactive. Also, please pick my brain as a lawyer anytime you want, to the colleagues from Ecker and Ecker, and I would hand over to you now. It's great, a pleasure to have Thomas Ecker here with us, who I think many people of you know also from presentations in EUCOPE meetings, and also Danny Bott, whom I think also many of you know, who attended many of our meetings in the more recent past. So thanks for suggesting, thanks for preparing to the colleagues from Ecker and Ecker. So I would like to hand over to you, and happy to bring me in at any time with some questions. So I will also make sure I make some comments here and there if I have any. But also to the audience, anytime, come in with questions. So over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Alexander, for the intro, and thanks for being part of this presentation. So let's move on to the next slide to give you a very short overview on the process, which is basically a process consisting of a 12-month activity, starting with the product launch, which triggers the submission of a benefit assessment dossier, so an HTA document, which is then assessed by EQUIC. After 3 months, there is the period of written statements and oral hearing kick in, and after 6 months past launch, we will have a GBA resolution. And based on this GBA resolution, there is another 6 months of negotiation period. So it is to be expected that after 12 months past launch, reimbursement price is negotiated and is known. And this 12 months is also referred to the free pricing period, at least until end of next year. But now I hand over to Danny, who will provide you with the details on this.
Okay. Before we start with the new regulations by the SHI Financial Stabilization Act, also known as GKV Finsk, I will use in the further slides SHI Financial Stabilization Act. We want to give you a whole picture from the procedure. So if we go 2 slides further. Yes. So in the old world, which is now dead, the reimbursement price will be valid after month 13 after the launch. So the whole procedure did not change, but the effective date of the reimbursement price. So what also did not change is the procedure itself, the benefit assessment. So it's a 2-step procedure. On the next slide, we see that orphan drugs still have the privilege that the additional benefit, which is granted by the marketing authorization, is still given. So GBA only determines the extent of the additional benefit. And this is always part of his assessment. EQUIC will assess still the patient numbers and the costs. If we do not have an orphan, but a non-orphan drug, in that case, so there's an ordinary unlock process with an appropriate comparator, where you have to show an additional benefit. That means the extent and also the probability against it. And the EQUIC assess the evidence, the patient numbers, and the costs. At the end, in both procedures, the GBA will make a resolution where he decides on the additional benefit. Okay, then this was the assessment procedure. Then we have the pricing procedure. On the next slide, in the old world, it was if the drug has no additional benefit, but it fits in a reference price group, that means reimbursement limits for specific substance classes, then this drug would be put in the reference price group according to paragraph 35, social code 5. If we do not have an additional benefit and there's no suitable reference price group, the reimbursement price should not exceed the cost of the most economic appropriate comparator. And if we have an additional benefit, and it doesn't matter how the extent it, if it's minor, non-quantifiable, considerable, or major additional benefit, and it doesn't matter if we have a generic or non-generic appropriate comparator, we can always negotiate a price which is higher than the comparator therapy. And if we have, of course, several indications, there will be a mixed price. Now, the SHI Financial Stabilization Act changed some of these rules, and these are the 10 main changes. This is not a complete list, but these are, from our perspective, the most important ones, which are now valid since November, the 12th of November last year. So as Alexander said, the orphan threshold was decreased from 15 million to 30 million, respective to turnovers. I will come to that to a later stage. Then the reimbursement price will not be effective at the 13th month after launch, but after the 7th month onwards. Then there's a mandatory agreement for price quantity scales or total volumes. Before the SHI Financial Stabilization Act, it was a should regulation, so not mandatory. Then we have several changes depending if the appropriate comparator is under patent or document protection or not, and if it was subject to benefit assessment or not. What is also relevant is now the consideration of waste, which will also be explained in detail in further slides. Then there was a special termination right for the reimbursement price contracts, which were concluded so far for 3 months for both parties. That means for the manufacturers as well as the GKV Spitzenverband. So, and a special termination right deadline exceeded on February the 1st this year. So there's maybe some contract terminations, but we are not aware how many. What is also relevant is the increase of the mandatory rebate for patented drugs from 7% to 12%, which is a temporary discount till the end of the year, which will be evaluated at Silvester this year. Also, what will be continued is the price moratorium until the year 2026. And there's a combination discount of 20%. It means a discount of 20% for so-called combination therapies, which are handled as payback. Okay, why do we need these changes? Why does our Ministry of Health want to change the law? So they expected, of course, a significant annual savings for the statutory health insurances. I will not mention all these numbers. So they expect up to 3 billion euros. Of course, the most part will be, of course, due to the increasement of the mandatory rebate of 1 billion euro, but also the new guardrails will lead to significant savings. Okay. Now let us go to these new guardrails, which are a little bit complex. We will, of course, explain them in detail on the 2 slides further, please. Okay, as I mentioned before, the application of the guardrails depends if the appropriate comparator has patent or document protection or not. So if we have an appropriate comparator without patent or document protection, in general, this means the generic one, but there are also cases where the product has no generic competitors. Then we are somehow in the old world. That means if we do not have an additional benefit, even if we have a full dossier, then the price should still not be higher than the most economical appropriate comparator. If the manufacturer did not submit a dossier, there's a punishment, then we have to be below that one. And if we have an additional benefit, it doesn't matter if it's non-quantifiable, minor, considerable, or major, we can still negotiate a price higher than the selected appropriate comparator. Now, what is it if we have an appropriate comparator with patent or document protection? So if the additional benefit is not proven, then the price should be or must be below the most economical one, minus 10%. So that means we have to give them 10% further discount. If our comparator is furthermore not assessed by GBA, there are somehow products before 2011, then we have to give further discount of 50%. That means it comes on top. If you have an additional benefit or a non-quantifiable additional benefit or a minor one against the appropriate comparator of patent or document protection, we cannot exceed these costs. It's not possible by law. The only way to get above these costs is to show an additional benefit with the extent considerable or major. However, if the appropriate comparator is still not assessed by GBA, in all cases, we have to consider 50% discount. What comes in addition is if our product leads to a waste, at least of 20%, then this price reduction is also to be taken into account. And of course, the mandatory rebate, which is increased to 12%. And what is considered to be as payback is the mandatory rebate of 20% for combination discounts, if we do not have a considerable major additional benefit. Okay.
So these are the guardrails.
Yeah.
The things.
Can I come in maybe with a question?
Of course.
I mean, how do you see the impact of this? I personally think the guardrails, whatever the saving potential is interesting and good to know. But I think the guardrails can have really in the midterm, really an impact on whether companies are launching in Germany or not launching, because we have already seen in the area where there is no proven additional benefit that this is where you see the opt-outs in AMNOG after a couple of after the first 12 years of experience now, right? When we extend that concept into an area where there is additional benefit, which is not considerable or major, which is like, I think this is where a lot of products are, right? So how do you see the implications for companies? Of course, it's a case-by-case decision and so on, but if you're kept by the price of the comparator, for many products, that can be having drastic effects, right?
So, okay, so yes, of course. So there are decisions from manufacturers which they want to go to court. This is no secret that the boss of Bosch wants to go to court against these rules. And of course, it's had major impact.
Okay.
Decision. Because maybe one step back. So the law says if the comparator you have chosen is patent or document protected. Okay. But if it, for example, it's an or conjunction, we have, for example, nivolumab or docetaxel. Nivolumab has data protection, docetaxel is generic. And we do not show an additional benefit against nivolumab, or we have a minor additional benefit, for example, then docetaxel will still be the appropriate comparator for price negotiations. Okay. So we see this is how we interpret the law.
Okay. There's a question in the chat from a colleague. What happens? I mean, maybe do you explain a bit again the differentiation between regulatory data protection and the patent part, the left part of your slide? Because the question is, does it mean if there's no patent and no regulatory data protection, does that mean that the price can be higher than the appropriate comparator? I think the answer is yes, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, then I'm just looking at the questions.
So there was one question concerning Livmeldi, which is an orphan drug. So these guardrails are only applicable for non-orphan drugs and orphan drugs which have exceeded the turnover of 30 million. So if you have an orphan drug which did not exceed the threshold, you have still the privileges that you have an additional benefit without considering an appropriate comparator.
That's a very good one. Thanks, Danny, for that clarification, because I don't think that has been written somewhere. But when you read the legislation, the guardrails would only apply if there is a comparator, if there is what we call ZVT in Germany, zweckmäßige Vergleichstherapie. And in that case, Livmeldi is a good example. It was launched before the guardrails, but even if it would come tomorrow, the guardrails would not apply as long as it stays under the 30 million, because there is no, technically speaking, no ZVT comparator. Right? So that's good news in a way for if you have an orphan under 30 million, if I may call it this. Okay, great. Other questions? Let me just tick the box on this. Can you decide? You can decide not to launch, but this does not mean that your post-AMNOG price won't be made visible. Can you confirm? It's a bit complex one. If it depends on when you're withdrawing from the market, right? The question whether your post-AMNOG price becomes visible, that's a complex one, not so easy to answer in one sentence, but maybe you have a try on this one, the colleagues from Ecker.
Okay, so of course you can decide not to launch in Germany. That means you won't go to any benefit assessment and price negotiation. Mm-hmm. At the end, if data protection will exceed. So you have to negotiate something which is called Preisstrukturmodell with the GKV. And this, in that case, you are forced to negotiate somehow a reimbursement price, although you are not in the market.
But it's not public.
Yeah, which is not. This is somehow a little bit ridiculous from our perspective. So yeah.
Okay.
But let's focus to the recent changes. I think that's because otherwise I think we'll spend hours.
I just wanted to bring in the audience a bit. Last question, which I think we can answer that quickly. The price for exclusive hospital products may not exceed the AMNOG price. That's also written.
Yeah. So the AMNOG price is applicable to hospital as well.
Yeah. As a cap in the hospital setting. Okay, let's go on. I think there's a question from Julian. We take that one later on. I didn't want to interrupt the flow, but I also wanted to make it a bit interactive, so we have a discussion.
Okay, so you see that these guardrails are a little bit complex. We have to try to simplify them, and to put in a nutshell, the pressure for the manufacturers increased significantly. So after we share the slides, I guess these bar charts will give you a better implication for the guardrails. So although the guardrails are stated in the law, there are still open questions, which we'll discuss on the next slide. And it depends if the GBA, next slide, please, defines an individual therapy. So if we have a look, for example, in chronic heart failure or chronic kidney disease, or specific oncological indications, GBA can define something which is called optimized standard therapy or therapy according to doctor's instruction, also known as treatment of physician choice, or a patient individual therapy. What all three has in common is that on the one hand, it's a basket. On the other hand, the basket consists often, not always, but often, of generic and patented or at least non-generic drugs, which we can see, for example, on the right side. So patient individual therapy consisting of afatinib, which is patented, or ramucirumab or nintedanib, and we have generic one like docetaxel or pemetrexed. And the main question is, are these guardrails applicable? And if yes, at which state? Can we deduct the patented drugs, for example, by minus 10%, even if we have a minor or non-quantifiable additional benefit? There are no precedences so far. Our position for the price negotiation should be these guardrails are not applicable for these three kinds of appropriate comparator, or at least if we have an individual therapy. But Alexander, please feel free if you have further insights or a different position.
Yeah, I've been looking into this. I must say, to be perfectly honest, but
it doesn't make any sense. So I think very, very difficult.
Yeah,
arbitration board has to decide and define a line.
Yeah, of course. I mean the patented slash generic no regulatory data protection. It's not always easy to answer if there's a regulatory data protection. It's also on the AMNOG eligibility question. It's critical if you have full regulatory data protection. It's not always that clear cut because of the concept of global marketing authorization and so on. Anyway, I didn't want to go into this in more details.
Okay. Besides these guardrails, we have, of course, further discounts. So we mentioned before that there's so-called combination discounts for combination therapies. Fixed dose combinations are not target of this law, but free combinations, especially ones in oncology, but only for those ones who have data protection. So there are multiple cases in multiple myeloma, melanoma, and so on. However, the pharmaceutical companies can submit an application to GBA to be accepted from this combination discount. This procedure is still ongoing, so GBA is currently investigating his rules of procedure, so his Verfahrensordnung, and it's expected, I guess, in the middle of April that there will be some change. So GBA will also determine what is combination therapy with new compounds in his resolutions. And so far, he started in December last year. He did not state that there's any new combination therapy. So we have to wait for the first cases up until now.
Yeah, that already answers the question in the chat to how free combination is defined, and that we need to wait and see, right?
Yeah, wait and see.
Certainly no fixed dose combination, which is fixed by the label regulatory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And one step back, please. So how does this combination discount work? So I mentioned before that this is no visible discount or price decrease. This is a 20% discount based on the exactory or on a reimbursement price, which has to be paid by each manufacturer. It means if we have a manufacturer A with a new compound and manufacturer B with a new compound, and they can be given in combination according to their respective label, both have to pay 20% as a payback to the individual sick funds. One exception, of course, if they have at least a considerable or even a major additional benefit. Technical implementation of this payback procedure is still not clear. The GKV Spitzenverband and the umbrella associations of the pharmaceutical manufacturers are still negotiating this one. And we expect that this will somehow be available in May this year. So, but there are still open questions, of course, how to identify combination therapies. So specific indications may be clear, but these are just hypothetical examples. Although we are perfectly aware that the real treatment word is different. For example, we have a patient which has two kinds of cancer. So, for example, melanoma and renal cell carcinoma. So we can be, on the one hand, be treated with nivolumab as monotherapy. And for melanoma and for RCC, he can be treated with cabozantinib. However, for RCC, you can also treat him with the combination therapy of nivolumab and cabozantinib, which is possible by the label. The other example is a patient which has multiple myeloma. So in the first step, he's treated with daratumumab as monotherapy. And then due to, for example, intolerance, just a hypothetical scenario, of course, the physician decides to change the medication to the double therapy carfilzomib and dexamethasone. And there's a bias, or potential probability for bias that the sick funds can misidentify this change of medication with triple therapy, carfilzomib plus daratumumab plus dexamethasone, which is possible by the label. And the major question or challenge for the sick funds will be how can we distinguish between the monotherapy, the combination therapy, or of course the change of medication? How can we avoid misidentifications? Because in the data the sick funds can now use, treatment lines are not recorded, intolerances are so far not recorded, because we have something in Germany which is called data protection law, also Datenschutz.
Yeah. Maybe to address two questions that have been asked in the chat. So first of all, this applies to all combinations of products which have been assessed since 2011. So this is relevant for all unlocked products. And GBA is now working through the history of 10 years in order to identify all the free combinations. And second point, it could be considered as opening the door to indication-based pricing. However, this will not be the case. At least we don't see this, because this would require the indication information to be captured and to be shared. And so far, this is not part of the data flow. And I think this would be very, very challenging due to the data protection considerations Danny just mentioned.
Okay. Then there was this interesting question, how is waste defined? That we will just explain in the next slide. So this is how the law stated it. So if unlocked drugs with a so-called uneconomical package size cannot be administered with a therapy appropriate dosage, and the administration leads or is expected to lead to a so-called reject or waste of at least 20%, then the negotiated reimbursement price has to be decreased depending on the occurring waste. What does it mean? So, for example, we have a vial containing 100 milligram of a specific substance, but the patient needs only 75 milligram. So the remaining 25 milligram cannot be used to a different patient because according to the SMPC, it has to be thrown away, so we reject it. So we are above 20% because 25 milligram has to be rejected. And this is the so-called waste for the law. And this will be not handled as payback, but it has direct impact on the reimbursement price. And what is the target of the law? It's not completed this list, but monoclonal antibodies in oncological and non-oncological diseases, cytostatics, insulin replacement therapies, and so on. And relevant is this regulation for unlocked drugs predominantly with parenteral applications. So as I mentioned before, vials or syringes. And if the dosage depends on the body weight or body surface. And there's still, of course, open questions. So how is it possible to determine waste and the impact on the reimbursement price? So it's still not clear what database will be used to determine the expected or the potential waste. So because the body weight and the size of a patient is not available for 6 months, it's not stated from the physician in his software, it's not given on the prescriptions. So how do we determine? There may be one solution or one option. In the benefit assessment, GBA uses the so-called German standard patient, which is following height and weight. So it's 1.72 meters and 77 kilograms, given by a so-called microcensus. This would be one solution. One possibility would also be the drug dosage on the prescription by the physician, or of course the settlements of the pharmacies according to the so-called Hilfstaxe agreement. But this only works if the drug is subject to these agreements. For example, I guess so-called Zirnas are not part of this agreement, would not function. And what also not clear is what is the correlation between the waste and the waste discount. Would 21% waste lead to 21% further discount, 1% discount? We don't know. Okay. Okay, then we go to the orphan privileges. So, of course, with the marketing authorization, we have market exclusivity for at least 10 years. And the benefit assessment, or within the benefit assessment, we have an additional benefit which is granted by law. And the revenues have to be below 30 million within 12 months. And now the threshold has decreased from 50 to 30 million based on pharmacy retail level. For of manufacturer level, it's approximately 23.8 million euro. You have to deduct this by the mandatory rebate less VAT. And if you exceed them, you have to go through a full assessment, which is identical to the non-orphan drug regulation. And this is something which is really important because since the reimbursement price will become effective after month 7 after launch, the payback period will be, of course, higher. So currently, before the SHI Financial Stabilization Act, the payback period started at month 12. Now we have to do this 2 weeks after the GBA resolution. And in case of an orphan drug, which exceeded the 30 million threshold, it will become a little bit longer on the next slide. Because the GBA will notice the exceedance of the 30 million threshold 2 months after you did this, so because there's some data gap. Then GBA will notify the manufacturer the date or the month where the 30 million threshold was exceeded and demands this manufacturer to submit a full dossier within 3 months. So that means after exceedance and dossier submission will be 5 months. Then we have 6 months, of course, of benefit assessment and then price negotiation. And it means at the end, since after month 7, after exceedance, will the reimbursement price become effective, we have a payback period of at least 10 months. And it will become longer if we have a look at the cases Alexander mentioned, because GBA stated on the next slide that he has identified 9 orphan drugs which exceeded the 30 million threshold on the 1st December of 2022. But to avoid too much workload in hyphens, he decided to phase the dossier submissions of these one to the second half of 2023. These are the 9 ones. So Yescarta has to submit its dossier on July the 1st, while Polivy has to submit its dossier in January next year. But the effective date of the reimbursement price and the start of the payback period starts in June this year.
So there is a lot of potential for accruals, which have to be accounted for. I think this will be really fun to discuss this with the finance department, and with the accountants too, which have to sign off this at the end of the day.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, it's clearly stated in the law that the time period of exceedance of the 30 million is relevant and not the calling into the full dossier submission of GBA, and also not the dossier submission is relevant. So you have to accrue some financials there. Very important point.
So altogether, I would give some outlook. So there are still some questions, and therefore it still remains exciting concerning the new guardrails, because there are open questions concerning an individual therapy, as we recommended. These are not applicable from our perspective. From the combination discount, there are open questions. So we have to wait for the specimen agreement in May. And the waste discount, we have to wait for precedences. What's the correlation between the waste and the waste discount? And of course, can GKV prove that the application of the medicinal product leads even to waste or not?
So how do these things really work out in reality so far? We have to wait on what the arbitration board makes out of this, and then once the arbitration board gives guidance, I think everyone can refer to, and therefore it's very important to follow closely what is decided.
Maybe one point, I don't know, Danny, if you have touched on that, certainly you have, but I just wanted to also reiterate the point that under the law, and there's also an arbitration board ruling on this, the reimbursement agreement has to include a price volume element, and it's not, according to the arbitration board, it's not sufficient anymore to use the old clause, which is like if you exceed 20% of the agreed volume, then there is a termination right. It needs to be an automatic reduction of the reimbursement amount, which results from an exceedance of certain volumes, which is also something I wanted to, that's also in the new law, and also has been decided by the arbitration board how that should be set up. So it's, Thomas, it's exactly like you're saying, many of those things will be ruled upon quite quickly, I would think, by the arbitration board. So we will have further guidance on those details.
I'm not that optimistic, because at the end it's kind of a strategic game. So if I'm leading the payer side and I know the arbitration board is going to decide in this or that way, maybe it's of advantage to keep things open. Because that's also
of course,
a strategy that
it's of course it's strategic if you go to the arbitration board, and that is not everything will be clear, but some points will certainly be fine-tuned, I would say, by the arbitration board if it's if it is of strategic relevance for either side of the negotiation table. Go to the arbitration board, absolutely.
Okay. So in the interest of time, I would suggest to use this as a kind of opportunity to move to the next section of the presentation, because this is basically on an arbitration board decision, which then has been challenged by the court, and it has been challenged in a completely different way. Maybe as a short disclaimer, I'm an economist, not a lawyer, so please take this as a strategic perspective, not as a legal advice. Alexander is the legal guy, and I'm happy that he can participate. Okay, go on to the next slide, please. It was on regadenoson, on the second indication, in which GBA defined as appropriate comparator a pharmacological stress agent according to physician's choice. Due to other reasons, which I come to in a moment, the company did not submit a dossier, and the reimbursement price was then set by the arbitration board because the company was not willing or not in a position to enter into agreement. And as the outcome of the price negotiation, the price has been reduced by roughly 30%. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. What have been the key points for the arbitration board? The arbitration board made a clear statement that they have to decide on the reimbursement price regardless of the quality of the GBA resolution. So once there is a GBA resolution, they have to act when they are called into action. And they are not allowed to challenge the GBA resolution in itself. They have to accept it as it is. And as the GBA classified two substances, to be precise, adenosine and nitroprusside, as comparators in this case, they can be used as the price line for the price negotiation. And third point that has been decided by the arbitration board is that this price applies to every pack that is sold in Germany, regardless of the way the product is sold. So even if it is sold directly to physicians, so-called Direktvertrieb, or hospital distribution only, this price or this price maximum still applies. The company was not happy. They forwarded it to the social court. The regional social court said everything's fine, and then it has been handed to the federal social court, so the so-called BSG, and we see this on the next slide, and they reacted in a totally unexpected way, which felt like an earthquake for me. So if we go on to the next slide, please. The Federal Social Court made the following statements. First statement is they said the early benefit assessment is in its nature an assessment versus the appropriate comparator. And if there is no appropriate comparator available, such an assessment is not according to law. And there are situations in which we have a therapeutic soloist. So there is only one product available. So a therapeutic soloist is given if there is no other pharmaceutical product approved for this indication and no non-pharmaceutical intervention is a relevant alternative. And in such a situation, GBA is not allowed to decide on additional benefit. And hence, the GBA resolution is invalid, and an invalid resolution cannot be the basis for a price negotiation and cannot be the basis for the arbitration board. However, take this with a grain of salt. So far, we have only the summary of the court meeting of the Federal Social Court. The this decision and the key reasons therefore, and that's the so-called Terminbericht. The full verdict will be available somewhere around summer. So we have to wait until we know the detailed verdict in order to better understand the details. However, the key statement, I think, is extremely clear. And this has a lot of implications. So, for example, if we review the background of this, so the Federal Social Court defines how the current law has to be interpreted. So if they say the law has to be seen in this or that way, then this is the guidance. And this cannot be challenged any longer. The law might change, but changes of this law are only effective for the future. The key for the Federal Social Court is that the benefit assessment versus the non-approved therapy is invalid, and such a soloist must not be assessed. And I don't see how the actual verdict might deviate from this key statement. And this creates a lot of questions. We see this on these questions, or some questions on the right part of the slide. So, what about prices set by the arbitration board so far for such soloists? Are they invalid automatically, or is there a need for action for the company? Or is this a job for the lawyers to do? What about prices negotiated freely for such soloists? Are they invalid automatically, or is there a need for action? What about products which referred to soloists in the price negotiation, so products which are second in the market? And if and how invalid price discounts will be compensated. So the Federal Social Court stated that the price for regadenoson is invalid. So the price reduction that has been set by the arbitration board is invalid. Who cares for the damage? Thank you. And will GPA repel invalid resolutions automatically, or is there a need for action for the company? And what constitutes such a therapeutic soloist? I think the situation in an off-label setting is clear, but what about best supportive care? What about physician's choice? What about watchful waiting? What about orphan drugs in general? What about human pharmaceuticals? What about compassionate use products, etc., etc.? And what about sales thresholds? If we have a product that has 3 indications as an orphan drug, and 1 indication constitutes a soloist, can this indication of a soloist be accounted for to identify whether the sales threshold of 30 million is crossed? It's not clear. But what is clear is that the GPA is highly alerted. We've seen this today, because today there GPA published a recommendation for for changing the law, or for they call it clarifying the law. So they want to provide also some guidance on how the law should be read and how the law should be viewed. If we go on to the next slide, we do see 3 different situations that are of relevance. So could we go please to slide 30? Your team from EUCOPE. Thanks. Great. So I think the left part, if we have a clear soloist, things are clear. We just have to wait for the official verdict, and yeah, to me at least this seems pretty clear. I'm not a lawyer, I'm an economist, but I see Alexander is sharing a view, more or less. Okay, you can comment it. The second situation it's much more interesting. So what about these different products I mentioned before, the different scenarios? What about orphan medicinal products? What about primas? What about best supportive care? This can be viewed as a soloist. And we have seen in the reaction from GBA that they already confirmed that this is pretty much the case, because they explicitly stated that best supportive care should be seen as an acceptable comparator, and they wouldn't have the need to do so if it would be clear that best supportive care is an approved therapy. Obviously, best supportive care is not approved. If we take the example of oncology, best supportive care, so let's say pain medication, is not approved to treat the underlying disease. It is only approved for treating symptoms. So there are a lot of situations which could create room for discussion. And on the right side, we have the scenario in which either the appropriate comparator could also be a soloist. So once we are second to the market, or one of the comparable pharmaceuticals is considered a soloist. And this also gives some room for discussion. We see this on the next slide with the, let's say, preliminary selection of ideas. What to do? And I think there's pretty a lot we can do. I explained this with a more clear-cut case of the soloist according to the Federal Social Court. So the clear case. So if we encounter in an advice meeting with the GBA that GBA tells us there is nothing approved, then the question is valid. We could ask for confirmation that the product is not subject to GBA will not confirm, but we can ask that this question has been asked and therefore should be put into the notes. And we then could also make a statement that we see this with reservation, so we have some concerns with the position of the GBA. Once we are in dossier preparation, we can also say we submit the dossier. We are obliged to submit the dossier. However, we have reservation, and we can make GBA aware of these reservations. Same goes for a hearing. If we are in a hearing situation, so dossier is already evaluated, and now the written statements or all hearing take place, we also can make it clear that we still do have reservations, and we can also ask trade organizations, like, for example, BPI, to make confirmatory statements in the hearing, at least as long as they agree. Similar in the price negotiation. We can also, in the price negotiation, make a clear statement that we have concerns with this need to negotiate, and that we participate in the price negotiation only with reservation in order to increase the pressure. And hey, what to do once the price is already negotiated and published? The question is, what can we go to the GBA? Should we go to the GBA and demand an annulment of the resolution and demand an annulment of the price agreement with GKVSV? So a lot of points, and again, I'm not a lawyer. Please go for a lawyer, discuss this with a competent lawyer. Like Alexander, please. Feel free to comment.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Thomas, for really a very comprehensive overview also about this complex judgment. My reading is first of all, I totally agree with the recommendation, which is on the last slide. I would put a reservation. I think that's really very important. Since we all don't know exactly what is the verdict what will it look like, because we don't have the full verdict. But we have, and this is I totally agree with, is we have statements which I can't remember since the whole time AMNOG is existing, since 2011, that we had such a ruling from a court. And when you look at the wording which is existing for the time being, it is very far reaching. So first recommendation, put a reservation if there is any parallel you could see in that respect. You can already see from the fact that GBA has issued a statement to change the law that there is a strong political push to do something. And I would think that the Ministry of Health would have difficulties to uphold this uncertainty into 2024. There will be something happening in 2023 on this one. This is, I would think, is almost for certain. Now, the interesting legal question, and I don't want to get into the detail, what is in the meantime? Because now I can have the legitimate expectation that if I'm certainly a soloist, that I would not have to submit a dossier, or that I would not have to finalize price negotiations, because the statement is very clear. But as always in law, lawyers tend to distinguish the facts. The facts of this case, which we are talking about in the highest social court, is a non-orphan case. So some people in GBA and in GKVSV will argue, look, there's no parallel with the orphan case, because in the orphan case, I don't have to define a comparator. And indeed, the BSG judgment is very much about the difficulties in defining a comparator. Now, there are counter arguments to that, but I'm just playing the devil's advocate, how some people might be arguing from, which might see the judgment not so favorably, namely GBA and also even more GKVSV. So I would totally, and I'm looking at time here, I wanted to allow also for some question. I would totally agree with the recommendation to put a reservation. Let's analyze the verdict when we have it, and then do what lawyers do. They distinguish facts and put the verdict into the perspective of the individual case. That's my recommendation for the time being. I know it's not everything clear yet at this stage, but I think this is what we can do. But it's very important to put those reservations. And also, thanks, Thomas and Dani, to highlight it's not always that clear cut. I would put the reservation also when I have best supportive care or watchful waiting. It's not really a comparator. It's not a defined comparator, as we see in some other cases. I totally agree with that recommendation.
And maybe Alexander to bring in to further aspects. So I think there is some room for creating that, let's say the playground or the scene, setting the scene, because we do have paragraph 73, section 3 AMG, so direct import from abroad, and we do have compassionate use, and these are things that can be influenced and which trigger or support a view that we do have a soloist situation, because otherwise both legal instruments would be illegal.
Yeah, I agree. That's a very good argument. If you have a compassionate use, you would only get by definition if there's no therapy alternative. I would also look at previous cases when you have agreed in the minutes with the GKVSV that there is no therapy alternative, that there is no price anchor and so on. That is stated usually in the minutes for the price negotiations and so on. So there are a lot of things you can do. And we just wanted to highlight the importance of this case law, but also the legislative changes on the guardrails, on the clawback with the 6 months. And I think thanks to Dani also for compiling a very a broad overview about this, which was very clear in my understanding. I just wanted to, I know we don't have much time left. Do we have immediate questions? Please also come up and raise your hand in the audience. We didn't want to keep you waiting for too long. Otherwise, I would take a couple of questions, or 1 or 2 questions from the chat.
Thank you. I think we have one or two questions here. There's a question from Marcus Droges asks, is it fair to assume that payers will not be responsible for refunds even if past assessments and prices are invalidated? Directionally, this can be viewed as an even stronger argument for first only to market assets. True innovation is rewarded, he says. But is it fair to assume that payers will not be responsible for refunds even if past assessments are invalidated?
Oh, that's a tough one.
For a lawyer.
That's to the lawyer. Yeah, they will do whatever they can to make arguments that there is no clawback possible. I think that's going to be difficult. I would probably think that the social courts will differentiate the case, that they will, when it comes to really clawbacks in terms of money from the company to the payer system. There are some other conditions to be met in terms of damages to be. I'm not the only thing. The thing I'm saying it's not a home run, Thomas. But please.
No, definitely. But I think there are exemptions in which this could be possible, and I think in the regadenoson situation. So there was an arbitration board decision setting the price. This price was set against the will of the company, and the Federal Social Court has said that this is invalid. I think it's tough to be in a situation not to claim refunds.
Yeah,
but I'm an economist.
You should definitely assess. We should definitely look into this. There's no doubt. I mean, I'm just saying. What I'm expecting is that the lower social courts will distinguish the case. That they will say, yes, this was a non-orphan case. This was a case where there was, I don't know, best supportive care as there was really no comparator, and so they will do everything to try to sneak out based on different facts. This is what I would assume what some courts might be doing. But anyway, it's extremely relevant to assess, and I totally agree with you that in this case, if you have a clear disagreement in the arbitration board, the price is set and so on, that there are valid arguments to be made to also potentially claw back some money from in the other direction, not as we are used to getting clawbacks in industry. And I totally agree.
Maybe we have time for one very final
There's
question.
one question from Adam Koyuncu, I think. If you want to take that one, I don't know. I didn't want to.
Yeah, so we have a very quick one. May past assessments with off-label comparators now be annulled?
If I may be coming in very quickly, I think that's a very hard verdict, and I would hope that the off-label use comparators are again off the table. GBA seemed to have been moving in that direction a little bit to allow for off-label use comparators. But of course, everything can be corrected by the legislator at the end of the day. Thomas, well, how do you see that the off-label use comparator off the table forever, or?
No, well, if you look into the clarification, this document is fresh from the print as of today, and GBA just announced that they want this clarification that off-label was intended by the law to be an acceptable comparator. So I wouldn't see this off-label, but I think it will be very interesting to discussion to observe.
Yeah, definitely.
However, I think it is a key point for the industry bodies like EUCOPE to be actively involved and put the pressure and make clear that hey, we are following this.
Definitely. Thanks to all of you. I mean, I just think we have to cut it a bit short here on this one. There's a comment from Adam in the chat as well that claiming back refunds seems to be possible. Indeed, I totally agree. But it's a fact-sensitive issue. I just wanted to read that comment to you. So totally agreed. I mean, we should try, or you should try as companies, if the facts are close to the case which has been decided by the highest social court, to also maybe to get some refund, no doubt. Anyway, lots of questions probably remaining about this. I would like to thank the colleagues in Ecker Ecker for a great preparation. For also the initiative on this one. I think the great turnout of a lot of people, more than 100 people being online here, shows the interest in the topic, which also means to me that we should continue to update you about this over the next couple of months. So probably we're going to be back on this topic with another webinar potentially in June or something, whenever we have the final verdict on the desk. So thanks so much. If there's no other question, back to the colleagues from EUCOPE.
No, thank you so much. I think we would need to wrap it up here in the interest of time, but I understand there are a lot of questions still remaining until we have the final verdict in front of us and further opinions from GBA. So with that, thank you so much to everyone who registered and participated today. We will stay informed about this topic, and of course inform all of you as members about this as well. And a huge thank you to the colleagues in Ecker Ecker for suggesting this as a topic and for suggesting to organize this together with us. So look forward to hearing more news about this soon. And if you want to keep up with EUCOPE's topics and some information about where we what we are working on, you can visit our website or follow us on our social media on Twitter or on LinkedIn.
By the way, maybe last word for me. I just see that we've seen some that the verdict seems to be published now, but it came out quite quickly. Anyway, we're going to keep you posted, and we will happy to we'll be happy to share it with you. Seems to be that we have the full verdict now in the meantime. But we're going to look at this and get back to you. Thanks so much. Thanks to the Ecker colleagues and all the participants.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mute.